Okay, I want to thank you, the Illinois Holocaust Museum, for inviting me to speak to you people. And this is my story. No one would ever know what we went through as children. We are the surviving victims of the Holocaust. And during World War II, we were in a camp, in hiding places, and on the run to escape the Nazis. And in our earliest years, we lost the right to be alive. And these experiences had remained locked up within us for many years. But we survived Hitler. And unfortunately, my sister Jeannette was unable to survive cancer. She passed away in February of this year. And this story is going to be in memory of our story. I was born in Lens, France, and my sister Jeannette was born in Antwerp, Belgium, where we lived with our parents. We enjoyed a happy, normal family life. I went to school and took violin lessons. And during the summer of 1938, my mother took my sister and I to visit our grandparents in Hungary and in Czechoslovakia. That was the first time we were to meet them. And unfortunately, the last time we ever saw them. My grandparents, aunts and uncles, all were executed by the Nazis. Of 9 brothers and sisters, my mother and 1 aunt were the only survivors. In the year 2007, I went to Poland and joined thousands of high school boys and girls on the March of the Living. We marched to the exterminating camps, Auschwitz, to Birkenau, and all day. The names of the exterminated were on the loudspeakers. I approached Birkenau, and the name Moshe Berkovich, Czechoslovakia. That was my grandfather. It took my breath away. But now I know he is amongst one of those ash mounds on these premises. All our lives changed the morning of May 1940. I was 9 years old and my sister was 5.5 when bombs started to fall. The Germans had invaded Antwerp. We were amongst thousands to flee and seek refuge in France. The next 4 years were a time of fear, of confusion. And while the bombs were falling all around us that May morning, my parents, sister, and I managed to run to the Antwerp train station with bare necessities. We were lucky to board a train heading towards France. I remember taking my prized possession, my violin. And after dropping it several times and slowing down the family's progress, my father said, "Please drop it. I'll buy you another one when we get settled." So I dropped it in the street. No, I did not get a new violin. The train made many stops. German soldiers were visible on the train. In Toulouse, France, my parents decided that it was time to get off the train. Why Toulouse? I never knew. There we were hidden in the cellar on a farm by people who put their own lives in jeopardy by helping Jews. We remained there for a short time until in August of 1940. Somehow the Gestapos found a hiding place. They seized us and piled us in an open truck and transported us to a deportation camp in Perpignan, southwestern France. The name of the camp was Rivesaltes, the little hell before the big hell. Most people don't know that there were concentration camps in France, but they were all scattered all around. The camp was very big and very bad. It had barrack-type housing. My sister Jeannette and I were in one such overcrowded barrack. There were no beds. We were given a small amount of floor space, which was covered with straw. No plumbing, no inner walls, and no privacy. The toilet was a bucket out in the open, in the barrack, for everyone to use. And selected women emptied it daily in designated place. There was an outhouse away from the barrack with running water where we could wash. Needless to say, conditions in the camp were wretched and sanitation was minimal. And we had no idea where our father was taken. Each day, German soldiers gathered the children into a room. We sat on cinder blocks, and they made it appear as if they were teaching us, but I don't recall learning anything. Perhaps it was merely for show. And we were not allowed to play outside. It would be too much of a hassle for them to keep track of us. Hunger was a way of life, bread and soup. I remember that my mother exchanged one of her undergarments for a crust of bread so that we could have a little extra nourishment. To this day, I do not pray. I do not throw bread away. We remained in the camp for several months. And news from the outside trickled into the camp through the underground network. My mother learned that partisan couriers, that's men engaged to fight the Nazis, were able to reach our camp and smuggle children to a safe place. So late one night, after the camp was quiet and most people were asleep, Mother took us out from our barrack and we went to the place where the barbed wire fence did not meet the ground as specified. And as instructed by the resistance men, she crawled down the first, and then she pulled Jeannette and I out. And somehow we escaped from the camp. Walter Lobenberg, may he rest in peace, the founder of our Holocaust Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida, has documents stating that his cousin Maurice had been in the French resistance during World War II. He organized the escape network for the Jewish children of Rivesaltes and Gurs. Gurs was another camp. Maurice did not survive. He was captured and shot. I live and able to tell my journey because of Maurice Lobenberg's heroic deeds. When we escaped from the camp, we walked through fields towards a train station. Mother was an instructor to reach, and she handed us over to a courier. We did not know him, and we did not know where we were going. We were terrified and bewildered. May 1941, this man who worked for the French resistance took us to an established hiding place for Czech children called l'École Pyrénées près de Vence, a mountainous region in southern France. We arrived malnourished and sick, and these wonderful people dried our tears and took care of all our needs. Meanwhile, my mother, not knowing where my sister and I had been taken, had to get back to the camp to try and get my father out. How, I don't know, but miraculously, they found each other and both managed to flee to Nice. And the odds of surviving such an attempt was nearly non-existent. Theirs was a fortunate exception. I can only surmise that their desperation to see my sister and I, perhaps for the last time, was so strong that they were willing to risk the consequences. In time of crisis, one becomes strong, and that was my mother. And through the underground network, the two of them went into hiding in a private safe home in Nice, not far from Vence, where Jeannette and I were in hiding. Life in Vence was as normal as could be under the circumstances. We attended classes and learned French, taught by French lay people who were sympathetic to our needs. I learned how to swim and was quite an accomplished swimmer. Our parents wrote to us, always sending the notes by the underground messengers. After several months had gone by, our parents took a chance to venture from Nice to Vence, and of course, always with the help of the underground people. They arrived safely and undetected. I hardly recognized my father. He was a living skeleton. And shortly after our reunion, our father died. My mother was there holding him, and my sister and I right beside him. He died as a result of the severe treatment and conditioned experience in the camp, much against my mother's Orthodox religious background and beliefs. My mother buried our father in a Gentile cemetery in Vence. And because my father escaped from Rivesaltes and was due to be transported to an extermination camp, he was being pursued by the Vichy police. Joseph Fischer, a French resistant who knew who to trust to furnish false papers. And so my father was buried under the name of Bizek, religion Protestant. Mother did what she could to protect our hiding place from being detected. And after the war, my mother moved our father's remains to Metz, France, where her only sister that survived lived and had burial grounds. As the war progressed, Vence no longer was a safe hiding place, and once again, we were on the move. Secretly, not only my mother, sister, and I, but all the children in Vence's hiding place. The underground continuing their work to save the Jews from the Nazis, located a chateau several hours north of Vence in a small town, also in the mountainous region, called Saint-Agnan, près de Croc. The chateau owners relinquished their home for the purpose of making it safe for Jewish children and the few adults they were to take care of it. We quietly left Vence by train in small groups and always being cautioned to be on our best behavior, and under no circumstance was there to be any conversation with anyone, so as not to bring any attention to ourselves. We arrived in our new hiding place, and we had hoped that this might be our last trip towards freedom, but it was not to be. In August of 1943, Mother was informed that the nearby towns, the Germans were rounding up the Jews, and their mission was to send them to extermination camps. Again, Mother was faced with the agony of having to send us away, and this time she told us about our journey we were to take, and we were going to go without her because it was extremely dangerous for Jewish adults to travel without papers. So she handed us over to two couriers who led us away. She watched us leave, knowing she had no alternative. It was a matter of our survival. These couriers had been hired by our aunt and uncle, who had previously escaped from Belgium and were now living in Barcelona, Spain. My uncle was in the diamond business in Antwerp, and therefore it was easy for him to get papers and able to make their way to Barcelona. We traveled by train to the foot of the Pyrénées Mountains. Then we crossed the Pyrenees on foot. And because we were children, these brave men took a chance by bringing us to safety. It was cold, and we were not dressed properly for the weather. And we were so afraid. We stopped frequently so that the guys could massage our feet to keep them from freezing. And Jeannette's mouth was taped shut because she kept on crying. All she wanted to do was hold my hand. We had to go single file because it was just a little dirt path that we were going on. And the Nazis were all around us. We could hear gunshots, and the slightest noise attracted them to us. And we were caught. If we were caught, we would be the victims of those guns. We made one stop where we get warm food and a real glass of milk and a bed to sleep in for a few hours before continuing our journey. At the Spanish border, where we boarded a train to Barcelona. And once again, we were instructed not to make a sound. The danger was great because we were traveling without papers. And once we reached destination, we met our aunt and uncle. We stayed in Barcelona for about 6 months while our aunt and uncle made arrangements to obtain visas to go to Canada. They had no problems getting visas for themselves, but since we were not their children, it was impossible for them to arrange visas for Jeannette and I to travel with them to Canada. And after exhausting all avenues of assistance from government agencies, we finally were granted visas from the United States Committee for the Care of European Children. From Barcelona, Jeannette and I went to Lisbon, Portugal, with our aunt and uncle, where we boarded the ship, the SS Pinta, to make our journey. The crossing was rough, and for 2 weeks, I stayed in my cabin. I was so sick. And needless to say, that to this day, I have not gone on a cruise. After April 7th, 1944, we finally arrived in Philadelphia. We separated from our aunt and uncle as they continued down to Canada. And we were left on the dock crying and alone until we were met by a member of the Committee for the Care of European Children. They accompanied us to Newark, New Jersey, where we were placed in an orphanage until the committee found foster homes, of course, with the help of the local Jewish organization. The foster home was in Providence, Rhode Island. My sister and I lived in the same home until the end of the summer. And then for the first time in our lives, we were separated. We each were placed in different homes. They were all in Providence, and we were able to meet on weekends so that we could see each other. They were wonderful families. I still am in touch with my foster sister to this day. It was at least 1 year after our arrival in America before we had news from our mother. And with the help of the Red Cross and Jewish Family Services, in 1949, 5 years after Jeannette arrived in Providence, our mother joined us. It was a beautiful reunion and sad, a bit difficult. Don't forget, my mother left little kids, and here we were grown-ups, teenagers. I already met my husband. But I did not know then, nor could I have known, the self-denial and the bravery, the courage my mother had to save our lives. Some parents would not have considered sending their children away. And sadly, some never saw their children again. Every one of the few survivors who remain owe our lives to someone who refused to tolerate the injustice, who would not and could not agree that death was our destiny. In our Holocaust Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida, we have a boxcar which carried Jews to extermination camps. Today, I shudder to think that it could have been me in one of those boxcars. But by the grace of God and the many caring French people, I am here. Yes, injustices have been committed, and we cannot undo them. But we can begin to learn how to respect each other and to practice tolerance so that injustices such as the Holocaust survivors had experienced never happen again. I speak to you about the evils of the Holocaust. I'm a credible witness, but generations of survivors are disappearing. Therefore, I hope that by sharing my experience to you, you and your children and grandchildren will stand up to protect the memory of the Holocaust. The memory must be kept alive. To those who deny that the Holocaust ever existed, I, who survived such horrors, speak convincingly, not only to share the effects of my experience, but to celebrate my existence. Now I would like to tell you the rest of my story. I graduated high school with honors. I went to college. I met my husband. We were married for 50 years when he passed away. I have 3 children and 3 grandchildren. My mother lived with us in Florida until she passed away. She spent her winters with us in Florida and in summer with my sister in Providence. And this is the rest of my story to be continued yet. Thank you very much for letting me speak to you.
Thank you so much, Marie, for sharing your story. It's remarkable. I've got a couple questions, if you're up for it.
Yes.
The first, what happened to your aunt and uncle? They went to Canada. Did they stay in Canada or?
They stayed in Canada and tried to get us back to go back there at that time, which was a few years later. And we were established, we were in school. We did not want to do it. And the committee, the Jewish committee, we were under their care and they would not let us go with them. And it was okay with us. We didn't want to go with them anyways.
Let's see, the next question. You share your story with the Florida Holocaust Museum and its audience. So when did you get involved with that museum and why?
My husband, when the committee decided to open, my husband decided to be a docent. And when he became the docent, he said, okay, now it's time that you put your story down and come out and speak. That's how so it's about 30 years. Yeah, it's 30 years already.
That's amazing. If you are willing to share, how did you meet your husband exactly?
When I was in school, when I was in Bryan College, I had an excursion to the New Brandeis College in Boston. And I went, and I guess he went too. And that's how we met. And from there, it was a made shidduch.
That's lovely. Let's see. You mentioned going to Poland in 2007 for the March of the Living. Can you share a little bit more about that experience of going to Poland for that?
It was it's something that all our Jewish children should experience. It is how could I tell you? It just, you were there again, and they should be made aware of what we went through. These, the March of the Living is from all countries, you know. It was a good and bad, but we ended up in Israel, so it was good.
How'd you end up in Israel?
Through them. The March of the Living was in Israel. Part of it was in Israel, and we were there for much of their, how should I say, it's activities. Yes, and that was only that was my husband and I went to Israel before that. So this was my third time in Israel.
Right. And had you been, into Europe at all before that or after?
Yes, with my husband, we traveled to France. We went to my father's grave, of course, and we went to some of the places that we were in hiding. One of them was a chateau. On the way to the chateau, we stopped in a gas station, and the woman said, "Sure, we have many people come here to," and they leave their name. I left my name. I am in contact with my friend. In fact, I just received an email. I didn't open it yet from her, so we correspond together. And we continued on to but I did not want to go to Rivesaltes, so we did not go there.
Great. One last question that I have right now. What do you want people to take away from hearing your story?
Just what I said. Just what I had mentioned, that I want them to know about the Holocaust, and I want them to remember the Holocaust. Don't forget it. It's happened.
Those are all the questions I have right now. So thank you so much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure to be with you and to meet you.